Morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this morning's webinar from the Office of Energy Transformation. This webinar is about enabling sustainable economic development here in the Commonwealth and the creation of a new focus area work group that the Office of Transformation is sponsoring. So today we're going to go over what this work group is about. We're going to provide a little background on economic development activities ongoing in the Commonwealth, and then talk a bit about how other states are addressing economic development, specifically focused on ensuring energy-ready sites. And then we'll provide an opportunity for some Q&A. The way Q&A is going to work is that you can ask your question in the chat. The moderator will then read the questions and we'll respond to as many of the questions as we can. We really are going to ask that when you ask questions that you keep them on topic to today's webinar. If there are questions that are not related to today's webinar, we will take them and try to provide written responses and post them to the OET website later this week. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to rewatch it and you can share it with others. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about Office of Energy Transformation for those that are not familiar with the office, as well as a context for this new focus area work group. So if you want to go to the next slide. So a little bit of context. As everyone on this webinar may know, Massachusetts has some of the nation's leading climate and clean energy laws and programs. Those laws and programs are focused on a few things. One, we have mandates to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, drive efficiency, and deploy clean energy. These laws and mandates then are implemented through a series of programs and regulations that are focused on achieving our climate and clean energy goals and consumer-focused outcomes. And the way we're going about that here in the Commonwealth is when we say consumer-focused outcomes, we're really looking at balancing equity, affordability, economic opportunity, and environmental justice. We recognize that these are all critically important to how we're going to move forward, achieving our climate and clean energy goals. And really those goals are being enabled by our investments in and our focus on electrifying big aspects of our economy, including transportation, buildings, and really cleaning up the power sector, making it more renewable and more resilient, and really relying further on clean energy resources that provide us with stable prices going forward. So if you want to go to the next slide. So Office of Energy Transformation, as you can see, as we discussed in the previous slide, the transition to a clean energy economy, there's a lot of moving pieces to it. And so the Office of Energy Transformation was established in May of 2024 with the focus on enabling the hands-on execution of the transition, with the charge to look at a few key areas. First, the gas to electric coordination and how we're going to make that transition from the system we have today, which is very reliant on natural gas and fossil fuels, to one that's less reliant, more reliant on electrification. How we're going to make sure we have a ready electric grid to achieve that transformation, and making sure that as we do it, we're enabling a just transition for workers, businesses, and communities. And one of the ways we're doing that to make sure we're getting all perspectives and taking an inclusive approach is that we've established an Energy Transformation Advisory Board that consists of about 75 plus individuals from across the energy ecosystem here in Massachusetts to really engage and help provide guidance to a strategic direction to the Office of Energy Transformation, as well as its 4 focus area working groups. And if we go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about those 4 working groups. And the one we're talking about today is all the way to the right of the screen, enabling sustainable economic development. But there are 3 other working groups that are ongoing. They've been ongoing since summer of 2024. They've made very substantial progress, and I'll talk a little bit about the approach that we're taking. But the 3 other work groups, the first is focused on what we're calling transitioning away from the Everett Marine Terminal LNG facility. It's a large liquefied natural gas facility that sits in Everett, Massachusetts, on the harbor there. And it can provide up to 10% of our peak natural gas demand needs here in Massachusetts. So think about those coldest days. it can really provide a stable supply of natural gas to our natural gas system in the state. And it's also, though, an expensive asset, something that the Massachusetts ratepayers are ensuring that it keeps running for the next 6 years or so. So we have 6-year contracts with the owner of that asset. Our 3 utilities do. And when those contracts were approved by the Department of Public Utilities, there was also a requirement that the state's natural gas utilities work to find ways of reducing or transitioning off their reliance off that asset. And since it's a shared asset, it needs a shared solution. So the first focus area work group is really focused on bringing people together to think through how can we reduce or eliminate our reliance on the Everett Marine Terminal LNG facility for the benefit of ratepayers in Massachusetts. The second one is about decarbonizing the way we meet peak electric demand. Today, we meet peak electric demand primarily through the use of fossil fuel-fired peaking power plants. And we also have in the state what are called combined heat power facilities that operate primarily on campuses that help them meet electric demand as well. And these assets provide a source of electric supply, reliability supply to the system, again, on those days when we need it the most. Also, though, they tend to be more inefficient facilities, particularly peaking plants, that have higher emissions than traditional power plants because of how they operate. And so as we move forward, look to decarbonize, we're looking at ways to meet our peak demand in a way that's more sustainable and also that's more affordable to customers. So we're looking at both supply and demand side alternatives. The third area that we're focused on is called financing the transition. We're really looking at ways of how can we make sure that as we move through this, that we're doing so affordably and equitably for ratepayers. So looking at alternative mechanisms by which we can help to pay for this transition and also do it in a way that minimizes costs to ratepayers through a variety of mechanisms. So that focus area work group is really focused on the financing aspects of this. And then finally, we have this new work group that was just established and approved by the advisory board here for the Office of Energy Transformation. So this is the webinar, this is the kickoff for it. And it's really focused on how do we make sure that we are going to be able to meet the state's economic growth goals, our development goals, our housing goals, and do it in a way that is sustainable and equitable over time. And that's aligned with our other land use and other related policies. This is a really important one. We have really exciting opportunities to grow the economy here in Massachusetts and to do it in a way that really builds on the strong foundation we have. And we recognize that one of the really important areas is making sure that we have the energy available to do that. So we'll talk a little bit about what our economic development goals are and what this working group is going to be really charged with looking at. So we go to the next slide. So just a couple of things on how we're operating the working groups so that those of you that are on this webinar can determine if you're interested in participating, and we'll have an ability to sign up. We'll give you a link to sign up for this work group at the end of this. But just a little bit how we're operating. The advisory board meets quarterly. The advisory board really sets the strategic direction. It approves the work plans for all of the working groups, and it make sure that as we move forward with stakeholders for our working groups, that we're having a balanced and inclusive set of stakeholders. So it looks at the stakeholders that are interested in participating and make sure that, again, we have a balanced group of perspectives. All advisory board meetings are public. And they're open to the public to view, and we do record them, and all materials shared with the advisory board are public. The working groups, they meet on a more regular basis. Some of our working groups are currently meeting on a monthly basis. Working groups are open to all members that would like, all stakeholders that would like to join. All they have to do is sign up. Signing up, though, does mean a couple of things. Expectations are that you are a subject matter expert or have a level of expertise in the area and in the work groups that you can fully contribute and participate, that you're going to follow all the ground rules. And we really are trying to have a very inclusive, open dialogue where we're sharing perspectives and listening for understanding. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And all working group sessions, unlike the advisory board, they are conducted under Chatham House rules, which means that we are not recording those sessions. They're not open for public viewing. Again, any stakeholder can be part of the working group. But once we're in those working groups, we do try to then make sure that we're having conversations within the working groups so that people can really feel comfortable sharing ideas, asking questions, and really digging in and working towards developing consensus approaches or positions to how we'll move forward with each one of these. We also ask that if you do participate in a working group, that you are committed to participating for at least a one-year term. So we go to the next slide. So a little bit about why this working group and what we're doing here and what the focus of this working group is. So today in the Commonwealth, like I said, we have a really great economic development and growth goals objective that we've made a lot of progress. At the same time, we know that it can be challenging times for new businesses grow and expand here in the Commonwealth as a result of our electric grid not being able to plug people in a timely fashion. And there are several reasons for that, including the fact that we've been able to maintain a safe, reliable system and meet the needs of the Commonwealth and of customers by making sure that we've been taking prudent actions to investment and not investing more than we need to meet demands. As we're seeing, though, an uptick in electrification needs, as well as growth in certain sectors and our desire to grow other sectors like climate tech, to continue our growth in life sciences, advanced manufacturing, and AI, which we know is very energy intensive. We are seeing times where it is challenging. So we're trying to get ahead of this. So the advisory board identified this as a challenge, as an issue, and wanting to make sure, though, that as we move forward to build out the grid, that we're doing it in a way that's sustainable and equitable. So if you want to go to the next slide. So we are looking at this issue of interconnection more broadly, even than just around what we're doing here in this work. My colleague, Assistant Secretary Josh Fryer, will touch on that in a few minutes. But one of the things and one of the reasons why we focused on creating this working group is it was actually identified not just by members of the advisory board, but through a study by the Boston Consulting Group, looking at how can we grow, particularly our climate tech sector here in Massachusetts. This was one area that they recognized could be a challenge and a barrier, which is having energy-ready sites. The other thing that we've been looking at across EEA, or the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, is we've really been looking at the broader interconnection process in general and how we can make that process more accelerated and how we can make it more seamless, more transparent. So my colleague, Assistant Secretary Ryer, will talk a little bit about that, talk about how we're looking at that for various parts of the energy system, and also how the work that he's doing relates to the work of this new working group on energy-ready zones. If you want to go to the next slide. So, as I said, the advisory board for the Office of Energy Transformation at its January meeting, it did approve this new working group. So again, this is the kickoff webinar. No work has been done in the working group. But basically what they approved was a working group to explore the concept of creating clean energy ready economic development zones that are aligned with existing and ongoing efforts on our interconnection, land use planning, environmental justice, equity, housing, and economic development issues in the state. Again, that's a lot. But we also know that if we're going to move forward and going to move forward successfully, that we have to keep everything in balance, that we need to balance all of these activities and be coordinated so that we're moving forward at pace and we're moving forward in a collaborative fashion. So the advisory board agreed that the FOG was necessary to enable expansion of capacity and to streamline the process for connecting new customers and new economic development customers to enable new load to connect to the grid, to attract more advanced manufacturing, life sciences, climate tech, and AI, to maintain and increase the competitiveness with other jurisdictions that provide energy-focused support and amenities. And we'll talk a little bit about what other states are doing and some ideas that we can glean from other states, and that there needed to be additional focus and coordination and input both with ongoing EEA activities around this, but also with the broader stakeholder universe that's within the Commonwealth that's interested in and focused on. We know there's a lot of great ideas out there. And so this working group is really going to be established to bring everybody in to understand perspectives, understand barriers, and work through ideas collaboratively of how we can break down those barriers and really move forward. So if you go to the next slide. We're going to be working through this in phases, and I'll talk a little bit about the phases now and talk about how this relates to kind of the broader way that the Office of Energy Transformation and the other work groups are approaching its efforts. So the way we've been doing things is we have been working through things in phases, with phase one really focusing on creating an understanding, sharing perspectives, and making sure that everybody has a grounding in what the issue is, what we're trying to achieve, what the outcomes are, and what the data and information is that we need to be able to develop a set of alternatives or recommendations, and then how to evaluate those recommendations. So phase one will focus on assessing barriers and priority businesses. Again, who they are, what they need, what the challenges are today. Making sure that we understand business needs by sector, because we know not all businesses are the same. Different businesses are going to require different kinds of, are different in terms of energy intensity, in terms of resilience needs, in terms of what they might be able to contribute to the grid. Then we're going to look at priority locations. How can we align with the locations that we've already identified from an economic developer's perspective as being priority locations, and then looking at how we bring those together and what we're doing today and how we might be able to even better align that going forward. And then looking at a set of recommendations for any changes that might be needed from a policy perspective, regulatory perspective, cost recovery, financing, to make sure that we can get these energy ready zones ready, make them available, and making sure that they're actually meeting a need of business going forward. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is just a deeper dive showing kind of how we move through things. All working groups that are working under OET are moving through in this same way. Phase one, phase two, and phase three, where phase one really is assessment, identification. Phase two is then going through and looking at and kind of evaluating at a high level different options. And then phase three is making recommendations to the advisory board. Again, as we move through phases, all information is provided to the advisory board to seek feedback and guidance. So this is just a little more detail on what we expect in phase one of this process. So we would expect phase one to be in the spring and summer of 2025, and it will focus on these topics. Again, the barriers, priority businesses, identification of priority locations and needs to understand what we're already doing in this state and what these locations look like, and how they are currently, what kind of capacity they currently have, and what we might need to do. And then really trying to think through what an assessment framework would look like. So that's really going to be the focus of phase one, and that will occur through spring and summer. We'll then move into phase two in summer and fall, after sharing the outcomes of phase one with the advisory board, getting their feedback. Then we would start with phase two, which would be to go through an assessment phase, assessing any policies that we recommendations that we might have, any things that we think might be helpful in order to actually get to where we want to go. And then again, we'll share that with the advisory board, and then move into a phase three in the fall and winter in terms of the recommendation phase. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley Stolba, who is the Undersecretary at the Executive Office of Economic Development. And Ashley is going to share more detail on what our economic development plans, goals, activities are to date in Massachusetts, and how this work can align with what's already happening and the great work that they're doing at EOED. So with that, I will turn it over to Ashley.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. And I do just want to thank you and the entire team at the Mass Office of Energy Transformation. I am on a lot of advisory boards and a lot of commissions, and I have to say that, Melissa, you're doing an amazing job keeping us organized and being really thoughtful on a really difficult topic. I think that was evidenced by all the what you just presented today. And I also just want to mention what a big deal it is that the governor and Secretary Tepper established this office. We are trying our very hardest to stay competitive and compete with other states, specifically for businesses. And I think this is one more step really in that direction to keep us really competitive. So we can go to the next slide, please. So we wanted to talk to you a little bit about the economic development planning process and a piece of legislation that we passed earlier this year. So every 4 years, we are required by the legislature to do an economic development planning process. So I know a lot of you on the webinar are familiar with this administration and the secretary. We thought that if we had to do this, we would make it awesome. So I think that's exactly what we did. We did regional planning sessions all across the Commonwealth. We even did a Spanish session, and we got 1,200 people and pieces of feedback weighing in our economic development plan. So we got a lot of feedback. We wanted a really diverse stakeholder group, and we created our economic development plan from this process. So the way that we did it is we separated out into 3 big buckets. In fundamentals, I'm sure it's no surprise to any of you that during our planning sessions, the top things on people's minds were transportation and housing. So we gave the Secretary of Transportation and the Secretary of Housing their own chapters in our economic development plan. They wrote very thoughtful pieces, and we're very happy that because of that, and in part of that, housing had a $5 billion housing bond bill that was signed into law this August. And then on transportation, Secretary Tibbetts led an awesome transportation funding commission, which released their $8 billion proposals earlier this year in January. So those are kind of off to the races. We also wanted to focus on talent. What we heard loud and clear during all of our planning sessions and through some of the research that we did is that we have the best talent here in Massachusetts. We have the best K through 12 education. We have the best educational opportunities for college and universities and other degrees. We're really, really proud of the individuals that we have here in Massachusetts. We want to be sure that we retain them and we attract them and recruit them. So that was another bucket that we created. We also realized that we're not doing a really good job in telling our story. We want to share that Massachusetts is the best place to do business and the best place to live. And we don't always do a great job at talking about that. So that's something else that we wanted to highlight. And then we wanted to focus on key sectors where we could invest in. And Melissa mentioned this a little bit in her section as well. But we decided that we really wanted to lean into the amazing work that we built up in the life sciences industry. A decade ago, Governor Patrick made a huge investment in the life sciences industry. And because of those investments, we're seeing it now. We are the global leader in life sciences here in Massachusetts. We wanted to build upon that and make a new investment in climate tech. This administration feels very strongly that one of the ways that we are going to get out of this climate crisis that we're in, because it is truly a crisis, is to build the best technology and the best companies to solve it. And right here in Massachusetts, we are in the best place to do that. And another thing that we want to do is just make it easier for businesses. So as I said, this group and the work that we're doing through this advisory commission and through this office is a really great step to keep us competitive and make it easier for businesses to relocate here and expand here. So that's just kind of a high level overview of the plan. I will just mention that our plan is available on our website. It's 66 pages, a lot of colorful pictures and graphs and all that. So if you want to take a peruse, you can check it out on our website. We can go to the next slide, please. So we knew that a plan is just a plan. So we certainly didn't want to keep this just kind of on a shelf and just kind of, these are our ideas. So what we did is we filed a piece of legislation. So we called the Mass Leads Act. And we are so thrilled that we signed this bill into law in November. So there's a picture of us and a lot of our stakeholders, the Senate President and others. We were very, very thrilled to sign this bill into law. It incorporated all the ideas that I just mentioned into a piece of legislation. And it was a $4 billion capital authorization bill that also had a ton of outside sections. Those are just policy adjustments. Many of those were focused on making it easier for businesses to expand and relocate here into Massachusetts. We can go to the next slide. Perfect. So, as I said, fundamentals was a key piece of our plan and of our legislation. And because it was a capital bond bill, a lot of those fundamentals were included in the bill. So some of you may be familiar with the Community Won't Stop for Growth. This is a program that we run out of the Executive Office of Economic Development. We partner closely with the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities and also Mass Development, our quasi-public agency that we oversee. We oversee 12 or 13 grant programs in a very easy, streamlined process for municipalities to apply for grant funding. So we sought to reauthorize all of the programs that are included in the One Stop, and you'll see a lot of those programs listed here. We wanted to either level fund or re-up all of those investments. As I said, we also made a lot of key policy provisions in the legislation. One of the things that we really wanted to highlight is our rural designation. We have over 180 rural communities in Massachusetts, and we really want to be sure that we're defining those rural communities and making sure that we're paying extra attention to those communities. We made certain permitting modifications. Again, there's a theme here, really trying to make things easier and streamlined and reduce burdens. So those were included in the legislation. And then we also made some key changes to some of our broadband legislation and also making it easier to develop in Devens. See you on the next slide. Perfect. As I said, we really wanted to really hone in on the amazing talent that we have here in Massachusetts. I will just mention that's not on this slide. We have a great all of government approach when it comes to all things economic development, specifically as it relates to talent. We work very, very closely with the Executive Office on Labor and Workforce Development, working with Secretary Jones and her team to really focus on talent here in Massachusetts. We also are a key member of the Workforce Skills Cabinet. This is a cross-secretariat effort that includes not only labor and workforce development, but also health and human services as well, to really be sure that we're focusing on all careers all across the Commonwealth. And one of the key things that we included in the bill was a statewide internship pilot program. We think it's amazing to give college students the opportunity to have real life experience working in an office and working in a job during college. And it also is a great thing for companies to be able to attract and retain young folks. So that is something that we included in the legislation. And we also included legislation that would allow internationally trained physicians who are authorized to practice in other countries to have limited license here in Massachusetts. And then we also included some information about incentivizing folks to work on nonprofit boards. You can go to the next slide. So this is really where the heart of the bill is here on this slide. And Melissa already mentioned it, and I did as well. But we really wanted to be sure that we're making key investments to boost the investments that we're making in climate tech and also life sciences. As Melissa said, these companies often need a lot of energy. And we're finding that they're coming to Massachusetts and they want land, they want properties, and it's sometimes unclear how much power they have in those sites. So again, I think the work that this group is doing, the advisory committee is doing, will be amazing to help incentivize those companies, really pairing nicely with the work that we did in the Mass Leads Act. We're also making key investments in AI. We do believe that we can be a leader in AI, specifically as it relates to kind of AI for what, the application of AI. We're already making key investments from the bill that were authorized and included here. And then we also made a lot of investments into the work that we're doing to support our small businesses. We want to invest in CDFIs and also a lot of technical assistance programs that we use to support our small business. And then we have a whole host of policy changes that we made in the bill. I won't go through each and every one of them, but one of the ones that I do want to highlight is that we did approve a number of EDIP reforms. So this is a tax credit that we provide to businesses that are looking to relocate and expand here in Massachusetts. Previously and over time, as some things in government do, the process got longer and longer and longer and more paperwork and much more difficult. So we took a really, really close look at all of the work that we had to do to offer these tax incentives. And we were able to reduce the application time and the application questions by like 60%. So we made a ton of changes to the EDIP program to make it easier for business to access our tax credits. When we also made through the legislation some changes that would allow businesses to easily access our tax credits in terms of refundable versus non-refundable tax credits. So we really are trying, as you can see, to make it much more attractive to do business here in Massachusetts. And again, working closely with this office, I think that we are doing just that. So I think I'm now handing it over to Josh Ryer to talk about interconnection. But thank you so much again, and we are just thrilled to be partnering with EEA and this office. So thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ashley. Again, my name is Josh Ryer. I'm Assistant Secretary of Energy at the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. I cover and lead a number of strategic energy initiatives, and one of the primary ones is what we'll be talking about here today, which is grid interconnection. Next slide. Great. So just to level set why EEA is focusing on addressing grid interconnection barriers. I'm sure as many of the folks on the line here today know that connecting new customers and new distributed energy resources to the grid can be a barrier. And specifically, it can be a barrier for economic development when the timelines for the grid connection process and also making any grid upgrades, which are often necessary, just don't fit with the business timelines for new companies. There's also several, for anyone that's gone through the interconnection process before, there's several costly and time-intensive processes that are included in interconnecting to the grid, which are largely necessary to make sure that the grid can be maintained in distributed electricity in a safe and reliable manner, but that comes at the cost of additional steps and potential cost to businesses that are looking to either move to Massachusetts or expand here in the Commonwealth. And as I've already mentioned, the timing of these processes can be difficult, particularly as we look to expand economic development opportunities and to urgently address our housing needs. The timelines for these grid interconnection processes can really butt up against the timelines that we need to see for economic growth and for housing development. We've also seen in the last couple of years, and why this is really ripe to be addressing right now, an increase in the number of complaints that we've received through the executive office, through the governor's office, and through other means in customers complaining about the timing that it takes to interconnect with the grid or other barriers that they've encountered. And also really importantly, I've mentioned mostly on this slide so far, the connection of new customers and the impact it has and the kind of incongruence with the timelines for economic development and housing development. But there's also a real impact as well on the development and deployment of clean energy in the Commonwealth. As folks are likely aware, we've run into grid constraints on a number of occasions over the last decade when solar development and other resources are looking to interconnect and deploy. And that, of course, has an impact on the Commonwealth's ability to meet our climate goals and to timely deploy clean energy resources. And certainly right now, building off of the success of the climate bill that was passed last session in 2024, that really looked to streamline both local and state permitting processes to allow for clean energy to be deployed more consistently and timely. It's really important that we follow that success up and the momentum that's been built there to help with our climate goals with addressing the next biggest constraint, which is the grid interconnection process. Next slide. Great. So based on all that context, internally, the team at EEA and the agencies that comprise EEA, including the Department of Energy and Resources, the Department of Public Utilities, and the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, came together to develop kind of an internal interconnection action plan to urgently and comprehensively improve interconnection of new load and distributed energy resources to the electric grid. And our ultimate goal is to make meaningful progress and updates to those processes by the end of this calendar year. Now, really importantly, I'm going to talk through these kind of three buckets in a second, but it's important to think about these topics kind of as two different buckets. The first being the connection of new customers or incremental load onto the grid. And then the second being the connection of distributed energy resources on the grid. Largely, the utilities see those as two different things. One is using power, one is putting power onto the grid. So typically those processes are separate, but of course there's plenty of areas where they actually overlap, and it's necessary to look at them as a comprehensive whole. So we're looking at both of those things individually and together in kind of under these three different buckets. The first of which is to look at comprehensive changes to how we plan and the policies that we have in place to ensure that we're not running into interconnection barriers in the long term. So really we're talking about here proactive distribution system planning to ensure that our grid is built out in a way that accommodates and explicitly takes into account our public policy goals around clean energy development, but also around transportation and building electrification, economic development, and housing. On the nearer term, there's kind of two buckets of areas that we're looking to address. The first are kind of issues that are being percolated up from the bottom. So we've experienced, and we're actually actively aggregating the complaints that executive branch agencies have received regarding the interconnection process over the last couple of years. And we noticed through that there's really a kind of a customer understanding and experience barrier that is often that customers often run into early in the process. So that's a good example of a barrier that we're seeing that's kind of being driven in the insights are being provided by customers that we've identified and have started to work on. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. And then there's the nearer term systemic issues that can be addressed, looking at ways that the interconnection process for distributed energy resources and those existing tariffs and processes can be streamlined and updated to make common sense changes that help, for example, projects that are stuck behind a large group study looking at a big upgrade, but where the grid actually has enough capacity right now to accommodate that smaller system, allowing that system to interconnect while the broader study moves forward. Next slide. So as I mentioned, there's two buckets. There's new load connections, there's distributed energy resources, and then within those two buckets, there's the three different types of changes that we're looking at. Long-term changes to make sure we don't run into these problems moving forward, and then the nearer term customer-driven and then systemic issues that we can help provide some relief here in the nearer term. Within that, there's a number of work streams that the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs in our agencies are working on to help address all of the different things that I just highlighted. But a few that we wanted to make sure to highlight here today that we think are most relevant to this working group is, of course, the first one, which is economic development zone planning, which is really key to making sure that we're incorporating our economic development goals into our long-term distribution system grid planning processes to make sure that the grid is built up in order to accommodate economic growth, but also conversely so that we are thoughtfully directing new economic growth into areas where we have excess grid capacity. So it's really important going to that first kind of bucket of making sure we have the right systems in place to ensure that we don't run into these interconnection barriers in the future, that we have these planning zones in place so that we can optimize the grid infrastructure that's been built out or will be built out to leverage our economic development goals. We also wanted to mention, and I alluded to earlier, that we're starting to aggregate load requests and complaints about the interconnection process that have been received over the last 2 years. As I also mentioned earlier, one of the common themes that we're seeing from what we've already aggregated is that customers, lack clarity on what the process is often, and frankly, it can be just an opaque and difficult process to go through. Lots of technical jargon, lots of different steps to have to take, and so that we've already identified through this process. But we want to dive the next, and we plan on diving the next step deeper and working with the utilities to identify, okay, within those complaints, are there specific technical or other barriers in the process that we can look to change to make the process more streamlined or more effective for both the utilities and customers. And then last but not least, we also have started to work with the utilities on a monthly basis to address that first barrier that I mentioned, which is the lack of customer education and kind of the opaque process currently for customers looking to interconnect. So we're actively working with them to, by the end of the year, be able to have a product out there and resources to help customers better understand the steps that are involved in the grid interconnection process, where they should go, what resources are available to them, and making sure it's clear and easy and efficient for them to connect to the grid. So those are all the slides I wanted to cover today. Before I pass it over to Catherine to close this out and open it up for Q&A, I do want to mention that EEA plans on having a webinar to dive deeper into the interconnection topics that we are addressing through this broader effort across our secretariats, and specifically diving into the barriers and the work streams to improve the interconnection of new load or new customers that are connecting to the grid. So more to come on that. We'll make sure that everyone that's on the Office of Energy Transformation listserv gets an invitation to that, but just wanted to put that on everyone's radar that we plan on having a webinar to dive deeper into these topics, likely towards the end of April. And with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Catherine.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine O'Malley. I'm Deputy Executive Director at the Office of Energy Transformation. I work on Melissa's team with our different focus area work groups and coordinating with the advisory board. And today I'm going to go through, we had a great introduction on what Massachusetts is currently doing from Undersecretary Stolba and what interconnection processes we have ongoing. Today I'm kind of looking at what other states are doing, what sort of inspiration we can get from other states, and how we can kind of compare. So 3 of the things we're going to be looking at today are economic development energy rates, certified sites programs, and energy ready sites, which Melissa mentioned at the beginning. So utilities in states like Florida, Colorado, and Virginia, some others as well, offer discounted energy rates for large commercial or industrial customers to attract investment and job creation. In Massachusetts, grid infrastructure alignment can foster the creation of economic development energy rates for our state. For certified sites programs, so many states like Ohio, Florida, North Carolina, Texas, and other states have formal site certification programs to pre-approve industrial or commercial sites for development, ensuring infrastructure like power, water, and roads are ready on day one for a quick start of service for those customers. We have our Ready 100 program here in Massachusetts, which is a pretty similar idea without maybe that formal site certification program. So that's something that we noticed about other states. And then the energy ready sites is something that Melissa kind of mentioned at the beginning here. It's a lot of why we're here today. So some states like Tennessee and Georgia are advancing energy ready certification to promote shovel ready industrial locations with sufficient grid capacity. And they usually coordinate this with utilities. So that makes it really easy for customers to come and connect to the grid. And Massachusetts currently faces opportunities to better align our grid infrastructure planning with site development efforts to do something more like what some of those other states have. So we have this big matrix. I know this is a lot of information where we kind of listed the different states we looked at based on Forbes rating of best states to do business. And also added in the Forbes best to start a business for some perspective there, noting that there are many different places where you can find rankings like this. So this was just one source that we used, and actually, just for context, U.S. News Business Environment ranks Massachusetts #1 for best place to do business. So there is a lot of great economic development offerings, as we already saw from Undersecretary Stolba's presentation, that Massachusetts offers to attract businesses. And a lot of why we're here today is to figure out how can we best align that with energy ready sites or things that we can better do to attract businesses and also enable sustainable economic development. So that's kind of what we're focusing on today. 3 of the ones we're going to dive a little bit further into what other states are doing is these certified sites, the economic development energy rates, and some clean energy requirements to kind of put some context into what we're hoping to strive for. So certified sites in other states, what is a certified site? That is a plot of land that is shovel ready for building new development. So it's been coordinated with utilities so that you can basically hook up on day one. It makes it really easy for companies to build on a plot of land. And Ohio and Florida actually even had like a map online of where you can find these. Again, we do have something similar in Massachusetts, but this is just calling out that like certification. So for context, Ohio has industries like aerospace and defense, bioscience and healthcare, education, agriculture, iron and steel, motor vehicle assembly, and they have 23 of these move-in ready sites with 30 to 240 acres. Public utilities are ready on site on day one with adequate capacity for industrial and commercial use so that you can have that quick startup service. And these certified sites are certified by Jobs Ohio. Florida has the same sort of thing. They have 39 of these, and they are certified through Florida Power and Light Office of Economic Development. So those are some of the things that we looked at what other states have. And Florida has industries like advanced manufacturing, aerospace and defense, clean tech, information technology, and life sciences. So a lot of overlap with some of the industries that Massachusetts is hoping to attract as well. So examples of these economic development energy rates are special tariffs in other states. So again, Florida Power and Light has this economic development rider, which is designed to help attract new investment and create more jobs in Florida. So eligible companies receive financial incentives or discounts on new electric demand for up to 5 years. And Colorado Xcel has an economic development rate. So eligible companies receive a lower price on their electric rates for up to 10 years and then tiered pricing after that. We have some details on how a new company would qualify, but these are some examples of the economic development energy rates that other states have. And then clean energy requirements. And again, Massachusetts has some of our own clean energy requirements. And part of why we're here is our clean energy mandates that we're striving for. So some states with economic development initiatives also have clean energy requirements to create zones for clean energy, like on rooftops, require new loads to have clean energy on sites, and provide incentives to encourage demand response to reduce grid and supply side investment needs, or have building codes and standards to reduce demand overall. So Delaware requires designated roof areas for future solar for new commercial buildings. New Jersey also requires any newly constructed warehouse must be solar ready, same sort of thing, designated roof areas for future solar. California requires solar ready zones for non-residential buildings. We have the list of all those buildings here. And then New York has the Build Ready program, which prioritizes previously developed sites, existing or abandoned commercial sites for renewable energy projects. So a lot of why we're here today is trying to figure out how we can best still attract businesses and also do it in a way that we're enabling clean energy deployment. So again, back to why we're here today. So we're focused on growing our economy by expanding and attracting businesses in multiple sectors, including climate tech, life sciences, advanced manufacturing, and AI, aligned with our climate and clean energy goals and other priorities. As Josh mentioned, the process for connecting new customer load to the electric grid can be a barrier to economic development. The timeframes don't always align, and sometimes need to make necessary grid upgrades. It can also be very costly and time intensive. And as we said, the timing doesn't always align with business objectives. So the administration and the advisory board identified this as an area for opportunity. And again, Melissa started us off with this, but to bring us back, the mission of this focus area work group on enabling sustainable economic development is to advance clean energy ready economic development in zones that enable key business sectors to grow in Massachusetts in alignment with the state's interconnection, land use planning, environmental justice and equity, housing, and economic development initiatives. So Melissa mentioned we are doing this in a three-phased approach. So phase one starts after this meeting today, where we are launching with our informational webinar. The first meeting we are thinking it will be the last week of April, where we'll discuss the Clean Energy Ready Development Zones concept, efforts in other states, as we kind of discussed here, and policy background, just get a little more into the details of what the goals are and what we're hoping to accomplish with this FOG. We'll meet about once a month through September to kind of build out this concept and brainstorm with the FOG on how we want to accomplish this. And then in September, we will update our Energy Transformation Advisory Board, or sometimes just called our Advisory Board, on the efforts that we've completed since launching today. And then October, we'll discuss our phase one recommendations and finalize a work plan and timing for phase two. So this is a bit of a sneak peek as to what phase one looks like. These are all estimated timelines. If we determine that we need more time for something, there's always room for that. So next steps. And just as a note, we will get to questions right after this too, but to understand kind of the process for this work group. So today we're asking for people to sign up if you'd like to participate. Melissa went through the governance responsibilities and expectations. If that aligns and this sounds interesting to what, and you think you could provide some really great input, we'd like you to sign up. So we will be dropping a link in the chat for everyone to do that. It will also be on the Office of Energy Transformation website. And we're giving until April 7th to register. So we will have this webinar posted to the website as well for people who are not able to make it today, or if you need more time. Also on the website are the bylaws, ground rules, and the approved work plan, which was actually shown as a slide today. So you can find them on the website. We'll send confirmation a week after that, after registration closes. And then, as I said, the first convening of this focus area work group will be in the last week of April. So with that, we will go to Q&A. So you should see on the bottom of your Zoom screen a place to submit questions, and we will be moderating and answering as they come in. So feel free to please ask questions as we go. So, sorry, let me just find a few questions now. All right, so the first question we have, and Josh is going to be helping answer these as well. So I think Josh, this is a good question for you. How does the work of the Interconnection Action Plan intersect and/or support the ESMPs that the utilities filed and the DPU approved in 2024?
Yeah, great question. Clearly someone's been following along. So I really emphasized internal interconnection action plan earlier because really what the intention of that plan was to bring together all of the various work streams internal to EA. And for folks that are familiar with the Department of Public Utilities processes and the fact that they're quasi-judicial, it means that when something's before them, we can't, even though they're part of EEA, we're unable to talk to them about it for well, it's actually a legal requirement, but it's also, fair, making sure that it's fair for all parties that are involved in that process and that they are treated equally. So really, we developed this action plan after the ESMP order was out, in part because it provided an opportunity for us in a time when we can talk to DPU about a lot of these topics to coordinate internally and kind of get where everything lives and who owns it and what we're all working together towards. So it's actually largely comprised of just existing work streams. There are a few, and I highlighted a few today, novel work streams that we'll talk a little bit more on the webinar, and we'll provide for that webinar kind of a summary, maybe right now we're envisioned as a one-pager, but it might become a two-pager that summarizes the contents of that action plan. But really, so the shorter answer is it incorporates that work and is really intended to build off of it and not to necessarily change anything, but also looking towards the future. For example, there's a long-term system planning process filing from the EDCs that are due here in the next couple of weeks that was ordered in the ESMPs. So that process and working group was explicitly included in the action plan. And our job at EEA is really just we have the experts at the Department of Energy Resources that are actively engaged in that working group. We have the experts at the Department of Public Utilities that will be reviewing that process. Really, in that filing, really what EEA is trying to do with the action plan is to coordinate things, make sure we're all aligned, and seeing where it all fits together. So hopefully that answers that first question. Of really the short version is it incorporates it into the plan and makes sure that we're seeing everything else we're doing within the context of all of the other great work that's going on. There's also this second question, I can just jump to it, Catherine, from Sophia, that's kind of related about how will the Interconnection Action Plan connect to the Interconnection Implementation Review Group, or the IIRG. And it's a very similar answer. One of the things that we've also set up internally after the action plan was developed is monthly meetings between EEA and EEA agencies to coordinate on progress on these efforts. And we're in close coordination with stakeholders that are in the IIRG, and we raise any concerns we have. I mentioned the monthly meetings we have to have with the utilities. That's mostly focused on customer experience, but any concerns we have with ongoing processes, we of course raise with the utilities through those meetings as well. And so we're actively monitoring that process. We're aware of the filing of the IIRG. And we're really excited to see the progress that's been made there. We have a few things on our list that it would be great to see the IIRG to kind of continue to work on, potentially flexible interconnection being one of those topics. So that work is included in the Interconnection Action Plan, and really EEA's role in that, as I mentioned earlier, is just to coordinate with agencies, make sure we're staying on top of things. And to the extent that there are broader objectives or priorities of the administration or EEA, those are communicated through our kind of internal meetings and captured in the action plan.
Thanks, Josh. So we have the next question, which also relates to the most recent question that came in. So I'll ask, and I think it should cover both. As we think of programs to promote and guide grid investments, do we have any inclination to support DER projects from an equity perspective? For example, community or municipal owned assets as opposed to private investment projects. And another question highlighted interconnection equity and how we're going to make sure we're including disadvantaged communities in our work here.
Yeah, sorry, Catherine, which question are you on? Whose question was it? Was it John's question that you were just going over?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great, I don't know if we'd necessarily say that we have an inclination either way. The work that I've been talking through, it's kind of working on the processes and making sure that we have all of the work all the work streams and all of the areas that we need to engage with the utilities to help improve the process, that we're actively engaging in those processes. I didn't cover kind of the equity component of that work, but certainly I think hopefully it's been made clear by the establishment of the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity within EEA. Equity is central to all of the work that we do, and it's been really helpful to have that team looped into all of our work. So I can't speak to the specifics of the question off the top of my head, but certainly taking into account equity in all of our distribution system planning and other work is a primary objective for the administration.
And just to bring us back to our mission, environmental justice and equity is a key part of that mission, along with other priorities. And so that is something that we'll be continuously making sure we're addressing with this FOG. So we had a question, I think I'll answer this one, Josh. Should we include a focus on the transition of the fossil fuel industry to a new clean energy economy workers and company transition? So We have a lot of ongoing efforts at the state here. One that Melissa and I are working on is a commission on fossil fuel workforce that is looking at just this. How are we going to support our fossil fuel workers in the transition to clean energy? And again, putting us back to our mission for this FOG, environmental justice and equity, as well as our three-phase approach will directly be looking at workforce there. And so we encourage people with input or expertise in the workforce to join and provide their input. But that is definitely something that we will be looking at and making sure that we're kind of addressing. Anything to add, Josh, before I move to the next?
No.
Cool. So we did have a question about the link. So Megan just dropped the link. I can see it, so please let us know if you still can't see the link, but that is the link to join. It's a Microsoft form, and you add your just name, email, and affiliation, basically, and we will add you to our listserv to join this FOG. And one question on what level of time commitment would you estimate is expected from the work group members? So our current focus area work groups meet about once, occasionally twice a month for a 2 to 3 hour meeting. Not everyone is able to join, but attendance is encouraged and definitely a key part of being on the focus area work group, I would say. And then as we have started moving to phase 2 with these work groups, we're getting into smaller work groups where we are asking for people to volunteer to do some more like offline work. So I would say in phase 1, you can expect 1, maybe 2 meetings a month of that 2 to 3 hours. And then moving into phase 2, maybe a little bit more of that. And we send out materials ahead of time. We encourage you to review those. So whatever additional time that might take. So hopefully that gives some context to, how much of a time requirement. So I'm just looking at the questions and seeing if there's anything we didn't answer. Josh, are you seeing anything that we haven't covered?
There's 2 questions. So one's from Steve. The question is when and how or I think probably will the costs be evaluated in achieving all the great goals and plans presented, and how to secure funds. Yeah, I think that that question will have to be part of the focus area working group, right? Determining, certainly there's a phase, and Catherine, you might be able to speak more to when in the plan phases that could potentially fall. But I will say, my recollection of the plan is to really first and foremost identify barriers to interconnection through this working group, identify kind of priority criteria for economic development opportunities and what they would be looking for in these sites. Then as we kind of work through that, we're going to have to think through, okay, what are the appropriate things that we would recommend to the Department of Public Utilities or in legislation or elsewhere that would need to be evaluated when these zones are proposed. And certainly costs will have to be a part of that. And so, and what that framework looks like for evaluating costs, I think is something that we'll need to talk about as a group. But certainly, Catherine, I don't know if you have anything to add to that response.
No, I think that's spot on. It's a lot of why we're here, and so figuring that out will be a part of the work group. And the last one, so we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but just to more specifically touch on Mary's question about interconnection equity, and how the energy economy model should facilitate local community-led projects that are disadvantaged currently, technically and procedurally in the current environment, the interconnection queue not favoring equity communities. I don't know if that's something we're going to talk about in this work group or in part of the interconnection action plan.
Yeah, well, I'd say this. I mean, just to double tap or reiterate, the comments both you and I made earlier of the importance of equity in all of our work and the explicit inclusion of equity in the scope and the mission of this focus area working group. So certainly this topic seems to be relevant. I'd also or be explicitly included in that scope, to be clear. And then I'd also add the fact that we have been more broadly thinking about, and I believe this has come up in other focus area working groups of the Office of Energy Transformation, enhanced opportunities for community led or community driven projects, whether that's solar investments or geothermal opportunities. That is something that we've started to talk about more in these focus area working groups and broadly across government. So certainly that angle we would welcome folks that do participate in this focus area working group to raise for us to consider in here. And I think the other last thing I'd maybe mention is we have focused a lot on in this webinar on the fact that we would be developing these working groups to help build out and to accommodate our economic development goals. But as many of Catherine's slides walk through, and as we've talked about this topic in general, we're also very interested in making sure that we're co-optimizing these locations in the grid capacity that we build out to accommodate it, or how we utilize existing grid capacity to be able to optimize the deployment of clean energy resources to help us not only meet our economic development goals, but also meet our climate goals. So I think everything that's kind of implied in this question and this topic is really timely and fits nicely into the topic of the focus area working group. And we just encourage you, Mary, to raise it as we move forward in the group.
Awesome. So that's all the questions we got for today. Again, we have the link for joining this focus area work group in the chat. We'll also have this on the Office of Energy Transformation. It's actually already up there. And we will be adding the recording of this webinar. We also have our bylaws, our work plan, and roles and responsibilities to review in your own time. And that's all we have for today. So thank you so much for listening and for hopefully joining the focus area work group. So that's all we have.